"The button," Antoine said, his voice hoarse, breaking the silence as they sat huddled in the cold kitchen. "In my dream, and what her spirit said through Felipe. She tore a button from Jacques' coat. It fell into the mud," Pierre continued, his eyes gleaming with steely determination. By the oak, no more words were needed. Everyone understood what they had to do. Time was short. They had to find that button before full daylight, before someone stumbled upon the scene and disturbed it, or worse, before Jacques realized what he had lost and returned to search, leaving Sophie and Marie at home to care for Felipe. Antoine and Pierre grabbed 2 storm lanterns and a small shovel. Hurrying off, the morning mist was thicker than the night fog, wrapping around them like a damp shroud. The path to the riverbank was no longer eerie, but a road to justice. When they reached the ancient oak, the scene still bore the haunting imprint of that day. A few strands of police tape still littered the ground. The air was thick with the smell of mud and death. The Seine flowed silently, its dark waters seeming to hide a terrible secret. They wasted no time. Pierre held the lantern high, its yellowish light illuminating a muddy expanse and tangled roots dark as giant serpents. Antoine, the dream's image etched in his mind, knelt at the spot where he believed the button had fallen. They began the search. It was meticulous and desperate work. The cold, slimy mud clung to Antoine's fingers. He dug with his bare hands, sifting through layers of muck, groping among slippery roots. Each time he touched a cold pebble or hard root fragment, his heart leaped, then sank in disappointment. Around them, the forest was awakening. The distant hoot of an owl echoed mournfully. The rustle of some animal in the underbrush startled them. Antoine felt they weren't alone. It seemed countless invisible eyes watched from the mist, the spirits of the river, and perhaps Élise's soul itself, holding its breath as they searched. Time passed. Antoine's hands were numb from the cold, his clothes caked in mud. They had searched for nearly an hour. Hope began to fade. Perhaps the dream was just a dream. Perhaps Élise's spirit had only wanted to name her killer, not provide evidence. Maybe it was washed away, Pierre said, his voice full of disappointment. Antoine didn't respond. He refused to accept failure. He closed his eyes, trying to recreate the dream as precisely as possible. Élise's hand, his position where the button fell. He opened his eyes, shifting his hand slightly, deeper under a thick root. His hand sank into the frigid, thick mud, and then his fingers touched something small, round, and hard. It wasn't a pebble. Its surface had ridges. "Father," Antoine whispered, his voice trembling with excitement and tension. I think I found it." Pierre knelt hurriedly beside him. Raising the lantern, Antoine slowly withdrew his hand from the mud. In his grimy palm lay a small dark object. He rinsed it with river water. And there it was, a button made of horn, glossy black, with 4 stitching holes in the center. This wasn't an ordinary shirt button like those worn by villagers. It was a high-quality button, typically used on expensive wool coats, the kind only someone wealthy like Jacques would wear. A single black thread still clung to its surface, violently torn. Here it was, the evidence, tangible, irrefutable proof linking the killer to the victim and the crime scene. A tiny object, yet bearing the weight of an entire life. As Antoine clutched the button tightly, a sudden cold gust swept through, rustling the bare oak branches above them. The wind carried no eeriness or malice. It was gentle, tinged with sadness, and in the rustle of the leaves, Antoine seemed to hear a faint, distant whisper. lasting only a moment. "Thank you." The wind faded. The oppressive, heavy atmosphere seemed lifted somewhat. Antoine looked at his father in the flickering lantern light. He saw tears streaming down Pierre's weathered face. But they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of relief, of hope for justice. They had it. The accusation from the spiritual realm and evidence from the physical world united. They formed an unbreakable weapon. Their battle wasn't over, but now they had the strength to fight. "We won't go to Chief Dubois," Pierre said, his voice regaining its firmness. "This time, we go straight to the provincial police station." Dawn had just broken when Antoine and Pierre set off. They didn't go by bicycle but in the family's old, creaky horse-drawn cart. The journey to the provincial capital took over 2 hours. An interminable ride in silence and the biting cold of early morning. They didn't speak. Pierre focused on guiding the horse, but Antoine could see his shoulders tense and jaw clenched. As for Antoine, he sat beside him, one hand gripping the mud-caked shovel, the other clutching the horn button in his coat pocket. The tiny piece of evidence was both a beacon of hope and a terrible burden. The provincial police station was the imposing gray stone building, cold and distant, utterly unlike the small, familiar station in the village. It represented a higher justice, a law unbound by village ties or the influence of a landowning family. They had to wait. First came the skepticism of the duty sergeant, who eyed them, a weathered farmer and a young student in muddied clothes, with weary, slightly contemptuous disdain. But Pierre's unyielding resolve and Antoine's composed, articulate demeanor finally convinced him to summon a superior. They were led to Inspector Lemaire's office. He was a man of medium build, with graying hair and sharp, keen eyes. He wasn't like Village Chief Dubois, who just wanted things wrapped up quickly. Inspector Lemaire listened and truly listened, with surprising calm. Antoine presented the entire story logically and clearly. He began with Jacques' threats, Élise's injuries, the local police's hasty conclusion. He deliberately omitted supernatural details, focusing only on verifiable facts. Finally, he placed the cleaned horn button, still threaded with its severed strand, on the inspector's desk. "This is what we found this morning, at the site where my sister's body was discovered," Antoine said. "It was torn from a coat, the kind Jacques often wears." Inspector Lemaire picked up the button, examining it carefully under the lamp. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze thoughtful. He had seen too many cases, heard too many stories, but something in the desperate sincerity of the two DuPont men, and more importantly, the existence of this physical evidence, compelled his attention. "The local police report calls it an accident," he said evenly. "They said there were no signs of a struggle. They were wrong. Or they didn't bother to look closely," Pierre interjected, his voice trembling with anger. "My daughter fought back. Her nails had blood and skin from someone else." Inspector Lemaire gave the two men a final appraising look, then made his decision. "All right," he said. "I'll send men to your farm, Miss Élise's body will not be buried. We'll conduct an official autopsy." Immediately, it was their first victory. The autopsy wasn't performed at the farm. Élise's coffin was transported by provincial police to a small village clinic repurposed as a temporary morgue. The room was frigid, stark white, and reeked of disinfectant mingled with a scent Antoine would never forget. The smell of death. The DuPont family waited outside, an agony more painful and interminable than any before. Each minute stretched like a century. Antoine could hear muffled voices and the clink of metal tools from within. He tried not to imagine what they were doing to his sister's body. Soon, Inspector Lemaire emerged, calling Antoine in. "I need you to confirm a few things." Antoine took a deep breath and entered. The sight before him would haunt him forever. Élise's body lay on a metal table. The white sheet had been pulled back. Decomposition, though just beginning, had already left cruel marks on her face and body. But Antoine forced himself to look. He owed her that, the forensic pathologist. An elderly man with glasses pointed out what Chief Dubois had overlooked. "Look here," he said professionally, yet not without empathy. Bruises on the wrists and shoulders, they match signs of being held down. The scratches on the back of the hands are typical defensive wounds. He gently lifted one of Élise's hands. "And here, under the index fingernail, we found traces of skin tissue and fabric not from the victim's clothing. We'll send it for analysis, but this is the most important," the doctor said, his tone more grave. "The water in her lungs is minimal. Not enough for a standard drowning conclusion, however. There are petechial hemorrhages in the eyes and throat. This indicates the cause of death was asphyxiation. The victim was held underwater until she died. Held underwater. Not an accident murder." Science's cold affirmation rang like a verdict. At that moment, Antoine felt an icy gust on his neck, though the room was sealed, and he heard it again. The mournful whisper, clearer than ever, as if right beside him. "Wronged." He staggered, steadying himself against the wall. Inspector Lemaire looked at him with concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Antoine replied, his voice hoarse. "Just..." He didn't need to finish. Everything was clear. As they exited the clinic, Inspector Lemaire informed Pierre, "We officially confirm this as a homicide. An arrest warrant for Jacques Delacroix for questioning will be executed immediately. Thank you for bravely seeking justice for your daughter." Justice. At last its wheels had begun to turn. But the price was steep. As they loaded Élise's coffin back onto the cart, Antoine couldn't bear to look at it. He gazed only at Normandy's gray sky. He knew the news would spread soon, and his peaceful village was about to face a storm. The news hit the small Normandy village like a flash flood. It didn't come from an official announcement, but spread through the familiar back channels of gossip. It began when two black Citroën police cars from the province Strange. Threatening objects screeched to a halt and turned onto the dirt road leading to the Delacroix estate. Housewives hanging laundry rushed inside to tell their husbands. Farmers in the fields paused their plows. Squinting toward the wealthy manor, whispers erupted in the tavern. The bakery, the small market, at first, mere curiosity. What are the provincial police doing here? Then suspicion. They're at the Delacroix place. Probably land disputes again. Finally, it exploded into an unbelievable truth. Passed from ear to ear with wide eyes and hushed, horrified voices. They've arrested Jacques for murdering Lisa DuPont. The once peaceful village was shaken to its core. Murder. Here, such a heinous crime belonged in ghost stories or Paris newspapers. Not this gentle land where everyone knew each other by name. Élise's accident, already a tragedy, had become a nightmare. The community was immediately divided. The Delacroix family, with their power and money, still had loyalists. They called it a mistake, a plot to tarnish their name. Jacques is a good boy, they said. He might be hot-tempered, but he's no murderer. Malicious rumors began to circulate that perhaps Élise was improper, that she'd led Jacques on, that she might have been seeing another man. But most villagers sided with the DuPonts. They were honest farmers, and they trusted what they saw and heard. They had witnessed the DuPonts' utter suffering. They had seen Antoine's determination, and they had never liked Jacques' arrogance and bullying. The truth, however horrific, seemed more plausible than a foolish accident. The most humiliated was Chief Dubois, also the village mayor. The provincial inspector's arrival dealt a severe blow to his credibility. Facing villagers' questions, he could only stammer weak excuses. It was dark. Fog, no evidence. But no one believed him anymore. Whispers grew that he had deliberately covered for the Delacroix family. Or worse, that he was too incompetent to spot a murder right under his nose. His old authority crumbled in a single morning, amid the village chaos. Jacques was held temporarily at the local station before transfer to the province. Upon hearing the news, Antoine felt an irresistible urge. He had to see his face one last time. The village station was an old, damp stone building. Rain began to fall, Normandy's cold autumn drops lashing the small window. Making the interior even more dismal, Antoine entered. Inspector Lemaire was there and allowed him to see Jacques. Jacques sat alone in a cramped cell. He no longer had his usual arrogance. His hair was disheveled, clothes rumpled. But when he looked up and saw Antoine beyond the bars, a grotesque smile twisted his lips. It wasn't one of remorse or fear, it was a smile of madness. Defiance. Come to gloat, scholar? He rasped. I came to see the face of my sister's killer. Antoine replied, his voice like ice. Jacques laughed, a dry, chilling cackle. You think you've won? You think you know everything? He stood, approaching the bars. His eyes blazed wildly. You know nothing. She never escaped me. He pressed his face to the bars, whispering to Antoine with venomous madness. She's still with me, even now, every night she comes. Soaked, freezing. Can you hear it? She's whispering my name. Antoine froze. He was haunted too. Élise's spirit hadn't just sought her family for justice. It sought vengeance on her killer. At the same time, ghostly tales spread through the village faster than the arrest news. Rumors, once vague suspicions, now blazed as certainties. They said that on the night of Jacques' arrest, a woman's mournful wail echoed from the Delacroix manor, though no woman wept inside. A farmhand swore he saw a dripping white figure glide past Jacques' bedroom window and vanish. The story of Élise's ghost haunting her murderer became the village's main topic. It was no longer just a murder, it had become local legend. A chilling tale of otherworldly justice. This year's Haunted Month had a new spirit, one unwilling to rest. Élise Dupont, from pitiful victim, had become an avenging ghost in everyone's minds. As police loaded Jacques into the car for transfer, the whole village poured into the streets to watch. They stood under the downpour, silently watching the vehicle roll away. It was a heavy silence, laced with satisfaction, fear, and pity. Their peaceful village had changed forever. A crime had exposed the darkest corners, hidden rifts, and an ancient dread of the supernatural. Antoine stood in the crowd, the cold rain washing his face. He watched Jacques' car fade. The station confrontation brought no satisfaction, only emptiness and revulsion. His family's battle was now the village's, and the coming trial would judge not just a killer, but the community's soul. Nearly a month had passed since Jacques' arrest. The village's storm of public opinion had subsided, giving way to tense, expectant silence. Autumn had deepened. The last leaves had fallen, leaving bare, skeletal trees against Normandy's gray sky. The air was cold and damp, heralding a harsh winter. On the day of the preliminary trial, the village ground to a halt, shops closed, farm work paused. Everyone converged on the local courthouse. The ancient stone building had witnessed countless local ups and downs, but never a trial drawing such attention. Inside, the air was stifling. Long wooden benches creaked under the crowd's weight. People jostled, eyes curious, outraged, fearful. The DuPonts sat in the front row. Time and grief had etched indelible marks on their faces. Pierre looked a decade older, Sophie gaunt, eyes sunken. Only Antoine maintained outward calm, though inside he was a volcano ready to erupt across the room. The Delacroix family huddled, faces ashen, clinging to aristocratic poise, but unable to hide their humiliation and anxiety. When Jacques was let in, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. He was no longer the arrogant young man. Captivity and terror had eroded him. He was gaunt, skin pallid. Once glossy black hair matted and unkempt. But most terrifying were his eyes, bloodshot from sleeplessness, darting wildly as if seeking an invisible threat in the room's corners. He looked more like a cornered beast than a man. The trial began. The middle-aged prosecutor from the province presented the case clearly and forcefully. He needed no bombast. The truth spoke for itself. He called Élise's friends as witnesses to confirm Jacques' stalking and threats. He presented the autopsy results, irrefutable scientific evidence of brutal murder. Bruises, defensive scratches, death by drowning, then the final exhibit. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, his voice echoing through the room. "This is the button found at the scene." He held up a small sealed bag containing the horn button. "And this," he continued, lifting a black wool coat, "is the defendant's coat, seized from his home. It's missing a button exactly here. Experts confirm the button in evidence matches the remaining ones in material. Size and stitching thread." Every eye turned to Jacques. The evidence was damning. A heavy silence fell at that moment. Jacques began to tremble. He stared at the button, lips moving silently. He no longer heard the prosecutor or judge. In his mind, only one sound, rushing water. "No, no." He muttered, clutching his head. His defense attorney rose hastily, trying to calm him, but it was too late. Jacques shattered. He bolted up, pointing at an empty courtroom corner. Eyes wide in horror. "She's there!" He screamed, a feral howl startling everyone. "She's watching me!" The courtroom erupted in chaos. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly for order. "Defendant Jacques Delacroix, compose yourself." But Jacques heard nothing. He was lost in his private nightmare. He ranted and screamed, not confessing to the court, but pleading with some invisible force. "She won't leave me alone." Every night, he howled, tears and snot streaming. "Every night she comes. From the river, soaked, ice cold. Her hair full of weeds, and her eyes staring at me." His words confirmed the village rumors. The crowd held its breath, a mix of horror and vindication. "She's dragging me." Jacques continued his frenzy, body shaking. "She grabs my ankle, pulls me into that black water, like I did to her. I can't breathe. So cold. Help me. Save me." In his utmost panic, he confessed everything. "I didn't mean to. I just loved her. But she rejected me, laughed at me. I snapped. I just wanted her to shut up." As Jacques screamed his final confession, the courtroom's overhead lights flickered wildly. The room's illumination stuttered, creating a ghostly, eerie scene. Several women gasped in fear. It was as if Élise's spirit was present. Witnessing her killer's reckoning, finally, police rushed in. Restraining the thrashing Jacques and dragging him out, the trial ended in pandemonium. But the outcome was clear, with his public confession. The formal trial would be a formality. Jacques Delacroix would pay for his crime. The Duponts left the courthouse weary but serene. As they stepped outside, a miracle occurred. The weeks-long drizzle stopped. A few feeble late autumn sunbeams pierced the thick clouds. Shining on the village, Antoine took a deep breath. The air felt fresher. The heavy, brooding sense of being watched that had clung to him for a month seemed to dissolve. He looked at the sky, and for a moment, he felt an extraordinary peace. The mission was complete. The wrong had been righted. Élise's soul could finally find rest. 2 days after the preliminary trial, the Dupont family could finally hold Élise's burial.